Hello and welcome back to the Yoga Well podcast. I am Chase Bossart, Executive Director of the Yoga Well Institute. Today I have a longtime friend, colleague, student, physical therapist, Deb Hopkins with me. And I usually like to start these podcasts by asking the person the background of their yoga journey. But I think, Deb, with you, we should start with the background of your educational journey, because I know in your undergrad you did a bunch with movement science, etc. So first of all, thank you very much for being here. Second of all, please give me a little bit of an overview of your educational journey starting in your undergrad.
Okay, well, I'm a person who learns best with a mentor, and not so much from books as well. And I had a mentor. Was working in water, teaching people how to swim, adaptive swimming, and I had a mentor there. And I got interested into the direction of PT. And then when I was at San Francisco State, I was lucky to have an amazing mentor named Dr. Joseph Higgins, who did a lot of research and taught movement science. This guy would give assignments like go out and watch people walk and write about what you see. Watch a peak performance and of some sort and write what you see. And we were supposed to think about how the movement, was occurring. And it was really kind of like, what do you mean? What do I see? And it went from there to
It's good background for yoga.
Yeah,
How many times have we done yoga observations and the instructions are, what do you see?
And then you're like, what? A person's bending forward. It went from there to, working on research with Dr. Higgins, and doing digitizing of movement and also in some of his courses, learning all the aspects of what dictates a movement and thinking about movement and patterns and a lot of things that ended up later. How do we develop these patterns? How do we change them? Equate to some of the things that we learn in yoga. So it's been kind of interesting how it's connected. So then I got my master's degree at a school that emphasizes manual therapy abilities.
So you knew to be a PT before you went to San Francisco State because of the experience you had teaching swimming.
Yeah, I was working with people that had disabilities, and it was just really interesting to me, fascinating to me in water. For example, the movement of the head in water completely controls where your whole body goes. So a person who's quadriplegic, if they've got enough ability to pull their head back, they can bring their whole body up and float. If they want to come more straight up, they can tip their chin and then the whole body follows. And all these like really interesting, aspects that I was learning about how to work and how to cue with just similar to how we guide in yoga, but not on a physical level, how to give just enough to help them find it themselves.
How did you get this job?
Well, I had a roommate who became disabled with multiple sclerosis, and quickly and very rapidly was unable to walk. And I was taking them there and helping them get dressed and get in the water. And so I was like, well, I might as well volunteer because they need help. And so then there was a man there named Michael Kamler, who was my first mentor, really. He just was such an amazing teacher. And so I've had 3 really good mentors: him, Dr. Higgins, and then you. So anyway, so then you want to tell you how I came to yoga? How I found you?
Yeah, but first, so you went to San Francisco State. You knew you were going to do PT. And you got into classes that were...
It was a pre-physical therapy major.
Okay.
But I also loved Dr. Higgins' classes so much that I ended up becoming a TA for him. and also being one of a few students who there was three of us who worked on a massive research project with him and actually got to go look to Columbia to present our research with him. He took us with him. It was
How
amazing.
cool. How
Yeah.
cool.
And it was, being in this like little lab, this movement science lab, and throwing out ideas and challenging ideas. It was very stimulating. And I learned so much, so much.
And then you went on to get a master's degree. And how is that? Is that a requirement of working as a PT?
At the time, that was the highest degree you could get. I think there were still bachelor's programs. My program, within a couple of years after I graduated, it was already very close to the amount of work you have to do for a doctorate, and they switched it to a doctorate, so.
So then you came out in 1990
7.
and got a job
Kaiser. I
at
started
Kaiser.
at Kaiser, and that was one of the best places to work as a PT because you had a lot of autonomy. And they also emphasized the type of uh, background that I had, which is a manual therapy Maitland approach, which involves a whole clinical reasoning, which is very similar in a lot of ways to what we learn with how to use the VUHA model. It's got different words, um, and it is different, but it is a model, and it's got a lot of similarities as well.
Right. So then you were employed by Kaiser for 20 some odd years
Yes.
and are now retired. When did you discover yoga as an interesting pursuit?
Well, believe it or not, my only experience with yoga prior to coming to my first class with you was all the people that came in that were hurt from doing yoga. And I was, seriously, I was one of the people that said, thought, why the heck are they having these people bend over like that? And it would make me so mad because, I could see part of it is a cultural thing. Like people they're in a class, they see everybody the teacher doing this thing, and they want to copy it. But I also understood from my movement science training how we organize our movement is very goal oriented. Object is here, get the object, touch it, reach it. How I get to it doesn't matter. I'm not aware of that. It's just, did I get it? Do I have it in my hand? And so it's like a goal oriented thing. And there's not a lot of awareness between the idea of I want that and then having it, like how I got there. And we tend to go through the path of least resistance. And I know if a person's got, tightness or in lack of flexibility and they're going to bend forward, that the quality of that movement is not going to be
Yeah, the body
very,
is going to do whatever it can in
to
order
touch
to
the floor,
achieve
to
to
get the hands on the floor, and it's often not safe. And it would make me so mad that people would go to these classes and do that. And why aren't the teachers watching them? I didn't understand anything about yoga really. I
right.
actually did a little yoga. I forgot when I was a hippie in the 70s. I did
Mhm.
have a little book on yoga and I would try to do some of the poses.
Yoga is considered by the casual observer to be about the forms. It is considered to be about what you are putting your body into. Can you do XYZ body position, etc. And from an internal viewpoint, yoga is considering itself as a process. We are looking at exploring um, how is it that my movements occur and how can I get them to be extensions of something that's very subtle in my system rather than being simply the patterned uh, unconsciousness. So it's such a dichotomy in the way that people think about yoga generally, and the way that on the inside, what Vinny Yoga is thinking about of as the physical processes of yoga.
Yeah, well, it's completely opposite almost. Like, the goal is the thing, not the process, versus the process is the thing. The goal is the
Yeah,
process.
and
The
yeah, the
goal
goal is the process.
is the process. And it's a very different approach. And I didn't really understand. Took me studying with you for a while to understand that. But
Yeah. So
so
you're
I
doing
came.
PT at Kaiser, and you're seeing all these people who are coming in with
Well,
and
now and then,
yeah,
that was my only exposure. It wasn't like there
yeah,
was tons of, but
yeah,
or
yeah,
shoulder problems or things like that.
yeah,
You know, so that sometimes they'd get from yoga or wrist things or whatever. But also there's this whole piece to it that's so American or Western, which is pushing the body to do more. To like that is the reward is to be these really extreme things that like you have no business in my mind you have no business trying to do that right now. Why do you want to do that? But you
yeah,
can't. I had no tools for addressing that. And that kind of thinking is a lot of the problems that underneath a lot of the problems that I would see in PT. People overdoing it. People, either chronic pain patients that had issues like cyclic overdoing it or just overuse injuries, people pushing, that whole mentality that's in our culture. So I came to
yeah. I
you.
just want to highlight, because you just said you're seeing all this and you're recognizing as a PT, I don't have
Yeah,
tools
I don't
to
have a tool.
address those tendencies in the person,
Right,
or on whatever it is that's in them that's making them do this push or do this overdoing or to do the repetition that they know is going to hurt them,
right.
or not
I
even be
mean,
aware of that it's going to hurt them. You don't
I
have
mean,
tools for that.
not
That's
not really.
interesting.
I mean, some education, but nothing to change their state.
Yeah.
You know, and then when I found my way to you, which was through my own physical issues, and your class, and I started going, oh, this might be good for certain people that I don't have any other tools for. I thought it was really interesting.
I remember you came to, I had a class at the Healing Yoga Foundation in the marina, and it was on Tuesday and Thursday, I think at 6:30. It was the same time for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And it was never like a 20-person class. It was always anywhere between 12 people were a lot in that class. And I remember that you came and we did a uh, visualization of a mountain area.
Yeah, that was profound for me because I missed my mountains and I hadn't been to them in so long. And that was a very, very powerful experience for me. And that was a personal reason for me to come back, not a professional reason
Yeah. I
at that
remember
point.
I remember after the class, I think you were crying,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you said to me, I because you grew up in mountains. You grew up in Quincy, and you're surrounded by them, and it's like such a part of your well-being. And you came up to me and you said something to the akin of, "Oh my God, I've been missing my mountains, and I realized that here is a technology for me to be with them
Yes.
every day,
Yeah.
even though I'm
Yeah.
not there."
Yeah. It was amazing. I mean, that was my first class, I think, with you.
Yeah.
Then I also remember another class that wasn't that long after that because I had a lot of physical issues, and you would always say, "Is there anything you need to let me know about before we start class?" And it was like, "Oh, do you have an hour?" You know, I would tell you, you knew my stuff, but then I went to a baseball game and was trying to shield my son from a foul ball, and a man who wanted to catch the foul ball landed on top of me, and I broke my ribs on the armrest.
Oh,
So I come to class, and now on top of everything else, I have a broken rib. And I'm like, I had even waited. I could barely breathe without pain. I couldn't really take a breath without pain. And this is a rib thing like this is a really hard thing to treat. And you don't, this happens and they come to PT, it's like, well, gotta suck it up, take some time. And there isn't really much tool you have, especially early on, to, there isn't much you can do for it. And so I told you, and I was like trying not to laugh because it was so ridiculous. Now I've got this. And I was able to breathe at the end of that class without pain. And that was the first time I went, okay, this has utility for PT, for my work with PT. And I made some comment to David, who was working at the desk about it. And he goes, "Oh, you should take the training." And I was like, And then I did. And that changed everything in how I practice PT. Everything.
yeah. So say a little bit. How did that change your practice of PT?
Well, first of all, I was in a more present state when I was with my clients. For some reason, I started getting really good reviews.
I
And I
remember
feel
that you told me you told me at some point that after you started training in Vini Yoga, that you got the highest
I was a high
positive.
flyer at
Yeah,
like top,
yeah.
couple percent of people in the whole facility
In
for quite a
the whole
while.
hospital.
Yeah. And I don't really know why. Others, I mean, I listened to people,
Uh-huh.
but also I was able to start incorporating breathing. And I remember before I took the training, the 500-hour training, I used to go to class and I'd get distracted trying to figure out what makes them decide whether it's an inhale or an exhale move. Like what's going on? And it took me a while, believe it or not, to realize that it has to do with the spine, you know. And then when I took the training, and then I realized, one of the biggest things we try to do in PT is get the spine to move in every level. In my training, is the hands-on. You're doing like mobilization of the various joints, and then you give movements that you want to help them to reinforce it. So the breath is just like stacking another way to really get mobility into the spine. And it was a huge tool. And, you know, by getting people to slow down their breathing, I was seeing that I had learned in the 500-hour training that I had a tool for a lot of the anxiety and the other things that go along with people, changing their patterns and the needing to change their patterns. And, and I got good results. I'd say that most of the time people didn't realize that the breathing was the thing. They'd come back and go, "Oh, by the way, I realized I really shouldn't be doing blah, 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 blah." It's like, duh. Really, I'm so glad you finally realized that, because they're finding their boundaries themselves, and getting better.
I want to just
Unfortunately, a lot of people, though, once they get better to a certain stop point, they're like, "Okay, now I'm good. Now let me go."
yeah.
They just want to take off.
Well, let me just make a point here. Yoga is really first person medicine. Yoga is really about empowering the person to understand and to make the changes and to approach their life that will be most authentic for them, right? What gets in the way of that is all this memory, all this history, all this training, all these patterns that we have accumulated over the course of our life. And one of the major things that we're trying to get from somebody is, well, I'm not telling you where to put your arm. I'm telling you to pay attention to what is the impact of the movement in your body. And here's what I would like the experience of raising your arm to be. And you find that.
Right.
And actually, every time you move your arm in the practice, you find that. Because when you are really paying attention to your body, it changes. And that is, I think one of the core ideas in what has become known in our culture as mindfulness, right? And
Yeah.
this mindfulness as a quote meditation been scientifically proven to be so helpful, et cetera, et cetera. This concept of awareness is baked into a yoga process, and it's really fundamental to how we are thinking about movement. And it then translates into the person's life, because if they're watching their own body and they're learning how to do that in this practice for 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day or whatever it is, when they get outside of the practice in their life, they also start to do that, etc. And then you have these points where you're right, where people come back to you and they're like, God, I realize that such and such and such a thing is like bothering me, and I can't be doing it anymore. And when that is happening, man, the trajectory of their healing speeds up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I know that one of the things we were going to talk about was scope of practice. And on sort of on the note that you just talked about giving tools, I feel like as a PT and as a yoga therapist, the tools, the understanding of what I'm seeing, or it coming through both lenses. And so the tools are going to always be yoga. So like if a person, whatever their special ability or other ability, like maybe they're a respiratory therapist, maybe they're a psychotherapist, their understanding or my understanding of the physical body and what I'm seeing is going to influence which tools and what that I get, what I decide might be the best tools to give them for them to make their own discoveries and get better. So that's where I feel like the scope of the practice is I'm not going to give them a stretch or a specific, okay, you need to do, squats. That's not yoga. But I might see that there's a need for some hip strength in the way their knee is moving or something like that. And then I will think, well, what are the tools? Or, and that's just the physical stuff. But yeah, so the scope of the practice, and when I'm thinking about how did I integrate yoga, I really integrated it into PT so much. I mean, if someone came and they had, post-operative rotator cuff, I'm not going to give them a yoga practice. They're going to get their protocol and all that. But then there's a lot of other people, most people, that just have like repetitive injuries or degenerative changes or this or that thing going on. And very often, almost always, I was giving them a practice with breath. And it was so easy to do with PT because a lot of PT exercises are stolen from yoga. So the movement, the bridge, the child's pose. I mean, there's a lot of things that are already
Yeah,
like
there's a lot of commonality between the
movement.
movements
You're
that,
calling them an
yeah.
exercise, and it's a movement, and you can just, I could document, and it was in bridge with breath,
Hmm.
and I knew what it was, and I
Yeah.
would make a sequence. The knees to the chest, apanasana, is a stretch.
Yeah. It's so
The
common in PT. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, and I'm sure they stole it from yoga. You know,
No, it's coming, it's coming to things from different perspectives. I think this is actually one of the things for me. What is the difference between PT and yoga? I won't say that the difference is breath. And the reason I won't say that is because now physical therapy has become aware that breathing is so important and so foundational, and they're trying, or they are implementing different breathing exercises in a very in a rapid way. And what is the difference is how you understand what you're seeing.
mm,
So we still give movements that are, dare I say, identical, or like, but the process of what you want to have happen is different.
well, in the scope of where I was working, I had to stay within pretty much in the physical parameter. Although um, there are some, like especially with chronic pain, there's a lot of veering into some wide ranges of, visualization as a tool, breathing as a tool, things like that. So it was easy to integrate those kinds of things, but I couldn't
But
document.
I'm really talking about, like, the physical thing. So what makes, as you're saying, knees to the chest versus yoga, we'll call that
It's the
apanasana.
it's
What
the way that it's done. Is
it's
it
the
done
it's
for
the
the
way.
goal,
Yeah,
for a goal to get the knees to the chest, or is it done for the physical process, like we talked about, being aware of the
that's
process?
exactly right. It changes the whole thing. It's a completely different
Right,
movement, even though it is an identical movement.
right. But it isn't identical though.
Yeah.
It
Well,
might
I
be
mean,
identical in terms of the
a
goal or the
or what it looks like. When I say
if you took
identical,
a picture.
yeah, if you took a picture from the outside, it looks identical. But
Yeah.
because the internal workings of the movement are so different, it's a completely different movement.
I do want to say though that it's not right to think that physical therapy is just exercises, because
Hmm.
there's all kinds of, there's craniosacral, there's Maitland, like I did with joint mobilization, there's myofascial, I learned some of that, there's osteopathic techniques, there's
Sure, sure.
tons of other aspects to it. And ideally, the way I was trained, the exercises are only to reinforce and sustain the manual therapy treatments that you give. And these days there's a lot of just giving the exercises. So anyway,
Yeah. So you started doing this 500-hour teacher training, and you implemented it into your own professional work as a PT, and you're getting like super high reviews, etc. And is there interest in that, from an institutional level, or from
not per
your
se,
colleagues, or anything like that?
not per se. I I did give it a couple in services and tried to explain like the idea of getting, the breath going, but people, I mean, it's a very fast paced world, and it got even faster paced since towards the end of my career. I retired in 2020. And what we do doesn't, I spent lots of hours that I didn't get paid for. It doesn't really fit the model very
Mhm,
well, you
mhm.
know. So, no, I
Right.
don't think so. Yeah, but
And then, so when you retired, What is the focus of your work now?
So now I'm interested. I got grandfathered in 2017 as a yoga therapist, but I'd never taken a training. And I felt like, yeah, I could display my skills when it comes to physical issues, and maybe some, because I was mentored by you, maybe some kinds of mental things that I had some tools for, like anxiety and things like that. But I really didn't have the yoga philosophy, and I didn't have a broad understanding of how yoga is applied to all these other things. And so I'm taking your training right now. And I'm focused on two things. I don't really want to do physical therapy anymore. I have no, table to work on people. I know when to refer people to physical therapy, and every now and then I might have a yoga therapy client who might need one or two. Like, I find that yoga does have some parameters, some limitations, some constraints. Like,
Hmm.
if someone's got excessively tight muscle somewhere, like a calf muscle or something, just doing a yoga practice every day that helps them get more flexibility might not be enough to change that lifelong issue of
Pattern.
tightness. So
Yeah.
they might need some additional stretches. So I might give something like that occasionally. Or I think another area that there's a certain zone that it's hard to capture in a yoga practice, and that is strength. So, like, if I think strength needs to be really targeted at finding exactly what they can do barely with form. So what can that weak muscle perform and still sustain good form, but then it's tired, and maybe it can do so many 5 or 6 reps, and then you see movement degradation, and then it's like, okay, that's the line. I need to be pushing right on that line, and if you're not pushing on that line, you're not going to, if you're too far below it, you won't change it. If you're above it, you're going to have bad movement. So you're not going to get at it. So sometimes there are things that need to be isolatedly strengthened. And I like to use the analogy of like a pantry and a recipe. Every movement is a recipe, and of different muscles doing lengthening, shortening, some are stabilizing, some are moving, some are relaxing. And if there's an ingredient that's really profoundly lacking, the movement production is not going to be, it's not going to be lasagna if you don't have any pasta. It's not going to be, you need to have some flour to make bread. You can't make bread without flour. So if your flour is so deficient, you need to just focus on building flour. There might be some ingredient, and then sometimes that's hard to do in yoga because we don't do enough repetitions, or sometimes it's just a positional thing, like we're doing combined movements a lot, or it's just sometimes there's cases where I will give a strengthening exercise, but not so that often. Most of the time I can find a way to get at it with yoga. So that's kind of
Very
how.
interesting.
So there's that when I work with individuals, and then that whole concept that I just explained is something that's part of what I want to do, is work with people that teach yoga, or advanced teachers and yoga therapists or yoga therapy students who want to learn more about on a mile level. Like, I feel like bringing some awareness about biomechanics of the joints, the girdles and the joints, um, and how things move, and what's required, kind of not so much needing to know the muscles, but understanding what's involved in movements. Not, I mean, individual muscles is just totally like useless almost to me. It's more like, where, if you're doing a squat on one leg, who's working? What's going on here? And if one part, if your hips are weak, what might you see? And so trying to help people get these basic understandings of biomechanics that I feel will change how they see.
Right.
So, like if a foot's pronating over, the knees tracking inward, do we notice these things necessarily? Not really. We probably, many people may not notice it, but those are significant things in terms of, my awareness of where that leads to if you keep doing it, because of my years as a PT,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's what I'm interested in now.
And you're good at it. The training that we've been going on now, like you have added immensely with your comments and your shares and your instructions on how to see things, and the sharing of the case studies that you've had, and you're really good at it.
Well, thank you. Hopefully, I love doing it, and I feel like a little bit of information can go a long ways for people. And
Yeah.
I hope that people can take just a little bit of exposure to this kind of thing, and then they start to see differently. And then over time, you're just seeing. If you're looking, you're seeing, and then you learn and learn and learn just through seeing. And that's how I learned. I never considered myself like a super academic person. I'm dyslexic. I was a terrible student and almost didn't pass high school. It took me 8 years to get my master's degree because I had to redo 2 years of high school classes. And I had
Well, you
become
didn't know what you were going to do at that point. And, once you find out where you want to go and you get motivated, then that also makes you a different quality student.
Well, that did. But then I also got diagnosed in college early on and then I got tools and things like that. So the watching, observing, and things like that have been really strong ways for me to learn. And when I went, into PT, I never felt really super confident because there's all these like PT studs around me, people that had all these different certifications, and they knew all. I actually was successful, and I think the reason I was because two things: I could see and I could listen. And that was, I'd get people sometimes that didn't want to go to another therapist anymore, and they give me all the problem people, the complainers, and the problem was that person had tons of skills, but they weren't listening and they weren't watching.
Yeah.
And so I rely on that, and so that's why I want to give it to other people. Is if you can see, and that's what I've always argued. Like, you don't need to know what's doing what if you can see. With the spine.
I wanna follow up with that. And Mr. Deshikachar used to say that observation was 80% of the job. I remember one time I started to get interviewed for a article at the IAYT's they have a journal, the International Yoga Therapy Journal or something like that. I don't remember what the title is. Anyway, one of their staff writers had come to a talk I gave, and was very interested in it. And her point was that we need to be, as yoga therapists, we need to be more like PTs in that we need to be able to identify muscles and know all of the different things and anatomically. And so we got a few hours into this interview that was going to be like at some point she says, but wait, don't you think? And I said, no, I think if you can observe and you see what is happening in the body, that gives you almost everything you need. Now, I'm not saying that. I don't want this to be interpreted as anatomical information is not needed. I don't want that to be interpreted that way. And I also don't want to say that it's not important. It's extremely useful. And the more that you know, it's very helpful. And what we're looking at is outside the body. And what we're looking at is the way that things move and shape.
But anatomy and biomechanics are very different.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I feel is important is the biomechanics. So if you see a movement, what's going on that's contributing to that? And then we do it in depth in the spine in our training. We've done it in depth in the spine.
You're talking about the yoga, or you're talking about in biomechanics?
The yoga
In the yoga,
and the
yeah.
spine. We look at what's moving and going on in the spine and what influences it and all that. But that same degree of understanding movement and observing could also be explored in the rest of the body. And I think there's a lot
It's a
there.
question of goals, right? It's a question of goals, because is the goal the healing of the body, or is the goal the uh, energetic experiences that arise out of a awake and flexible spine?
I
So
am both.
that's where you get the reason for it. Mr. Deshakachar was valedictorian of his um, structural engineering class at the university. And he was very interested in the biomechanics of the body. And I think that Vinyasa Yoga is known for our therapeutics, etc. And I think that a big, some portion of that, is his interest in how the whole system and whole body is working, etc. And of course, you know, the rest of the body is connected to the spine. I'm not saying
All
it's
right. Yeah.
it's not separate things, but the reason why, in your experience, the focus has been so on the spine is because of these reasons.
Well, no, I think it's super important, and I agree with you. One thing I want to say that came up for me when you're saying that is about the flow, the energetic flow. Is I get really into like finding the ways that yoga and the Western physiology like actually are saying the same thing. And so, like for example, if a person's all like tight in here and their shoulders really far forward, and then they're lifting their arm up, and they're going to get shoulder pain, from that construction that's developed over time. Well, what opening it up does is actually on a cellular level allowing things to not be compressed and constricted, and it's allowing flow. It's so to me, I equate perfusion and of the blood and cleaning that the blood does and the lymph system, I equate that to prana. I mean,
Absolutely.
prana is liquid.
Absolutely.
It's a vehicle of prana, and it's so like the same thing that's going to make the prana flow better is also going to be taking away compression and constriction, and it all lines up.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
It
Yeah.
blows me away.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the scope of practice for a yoga therapist?
I think it should be defined by the tools that we use
Okay.
and the that we can treat any dimension using yoga tools. But yeah. I mean,
When you say dimension, you mean the physical, physiological, mental,
the
perceptual, or
Panchmaya model.
behavioral, yeah,
Panchmaya model.
and emotional, the five
Yeah,
Mayas in the Panchamaya model.
right.
Yeah. Mhm.
And but we have to be using the tools of yoga.
Right.
Where I think the scope of practice gets tricky is where we have this idea that people with some kind of a medical background or training are going to get a few hundred hours of yoga and then be able to apply it in their field. And I feel like that's not, the tools take a long time to learn, a long time to
You
really
know,
learn and learn
this,
appropriate application. So I think that if this idea, now I'm going to talk about this thing that happened in IYT, the idea of that they're doing at Stanford. I could imagine that if they had a 300-hour program that was specified to your medical field, applications of yoga, therapeutic yoga for PETs, and they mostly focused on incorporating breath with movement, maybe some basic breathing stuff for stress, or but really kept it focused on the scope of PT. That would be okay with me. If you had a different course that was 300 hours and it was for psychotherapists, and they kept it focused on that. I don't want a person with a back problem going to a psychotherapist and giving them some kind of thing to do for their back. I don't want somebody who's got a serious mental health issue coming to a PT and go, by the way, here, this is for your bipolar, or here, this is for your depression. It's not enough. We don't have enough time in 300 hours to teach how to use the tools. The tools are the scope of the practice. The application and how we choose them is based on our lens, which should be, you're trained in the yoga, but if you have also another lens, that's going to influence it. I don't
yeah,
think having particular training in one field, like being a respiratory therapist or a nurse or a PT or a psychotherapist, should allow you access to all the tools that are on the table for yoga therapy and you're supposed to learn them in 300 hours. I just don't think it's appropriate.
I think that this actually points to, so let me just back up, and for those who don't know, there was a IAYT in the in recent few years has started to unroll a program for already licensed medical practitioners in the US, that if you they created a program where if you do a 300-hour training in yoga, then that makes that medical practitioner a yoga therapist. They get a certification and
I
whatnot.
don't know if they're calling it a yoga therapist. It has a different name.
It does? Okay.
I'm pretty
So,
sure.
yoga therapist community was a little slow to respond to this, but um, there has now been a big backlash against IAYT, including the director of the IAYT stepping down. And I think it's really correct, because I think what happened in the past few years is that the yoga part got subsumed under the Western medical slash therapy part. And that what has been lost in the organization in that time, and I'm not saying that the whole organization, but I think the most recent director who just left, the direction she was taking the organization was really emphasizing the integration of yoga therapy into existing medical institutions in the West. And, from my perspective, I don't think integrative medicine is possible. I think complementary medicine is possible. In yoga, the starting point is you are a spiritual being having a human experience. And in the Western medicine, the material facts are all the facts. The outset, we're talking about two different approaches to the human system and how things function and work. And I don't think that we should take. I don't think we should take the Western people who are already licensed in that Western perspective. We shouldn't just say, well, here, after some small training, here, you're also a yoga expert. It's just ridiculous. And it really devalues who we are and what we bring to the table. And I think that's really something that needs to be addressed. You know, there was a huge backlash and they stopped accepting applications for that training, but they let the trainings that have already been approved continue and actually take students and start and all of that stuff. And I feel personally, I feel betrayed by IAYT. I think they have done a really poor job in establishing yoga therapy in this way.
I feel like I can't help but feel like it's got to do with money in a lot of ways. People want to make money, and it's not like people are dying to have personal transformation. Like they want it, but they want it like spiritual bypass version, and this is about really doing the work. And you're right. It's some kind of, it is selling out. And, one could argue, and I saw arguments that were like, well, but this is going to get the word out about yoga therapy and this and that. But what I saw that I really liked was some of the people who are here who are from India, who have worked like in the model where Mr. Desikachar was, side by side with the Indian hospitals and doctors, and them saying, you don't know what's going on over in India. If you want to know how to do it, we can, this is where we need to look. And I would really like to see that happen. And how can we make that happen? And I feel like the Western model isn't necessarily closed-minded to that. I think they just aren't, it's not, they don't know. They don't know any better. People have good intentions. Yeah, I don't know how we can get there, but those discussions were starting. It's like bringing over people from India to talk to people in the Western model about how they are doing this complementary medicine. I'd love to see that happen. But meanwhile, people are trying to survive. They get their certification as a yoga therapist, and they're trying to find work. And I tried to do things at Kaiser, and I was told, "Well, we don't want you to teach a meditation class at the chemical dependency department on your own time, because now that'll make all the other departments think that we're supplying PTs to teach yoga." I'm a yoga therapist. What do like any PT can teach yoga. I mean, come on. It's ignorance is all it is, really. And so we really need to get at the root of that and be kind about it and just show there's this. This is another way. This is how it's being done here. It's going to take a long time to educate people.
It's interesting to me that your scope of practice is based on the tools. So tools are movement, sound, attention,
yoga philosophy,
ideas, principles,
relationship, kavacha.
Mr. Deshikachar used to say that his favorite definition of yoga was relationship. And if I had to define yoga, it's some sort of science of experience. The currency of our modality, the tools of our modality is experience. So you can generate experiences through movement, or you can generate experiences through breathing, or through where you put your attention. Am I putting my attention on the mountains, or am I putting my attention on the cross? Or right, yeah, different experiences arise out of that. Sound, if make one sound or another sound has a different experience. These yoga things where everybody gets the same 26 poses, or everybody has the same, this is the first series, then you go to the second series, etc. Everybody's all the same thing like this. Give the impression, even though I know well that in Ashtanga yoga, everybody gets the same series of things to do, but the proper application of it is very personalized and revised for the person who's going through that. But the point is that, it gives the impression that um, yoga is stretching and yoga is body positions, or that yoga is meditation, and that, people think meditation as relaxation. Those things really do not capture the full breadth and depth of what it is that we are doing with experiences.
It takes me back what you're saying, like when I studied with Dr. Higgins, skill acquisition and how to teach how to teach somebody, how do people develop their patterns of movement and discover success in movement and this and that. It's all about facilitating the aha moment, which is, you don't say, you do it like this, and then you do that, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then that's it. It's like you have to try to create cues, either verbal or however.
Yeah.
Can be touching with a like a neurologic client, or in person. The minimal amount of input to facilitate them having an experience where they go, "Ah, I found it." The aha moment is so powerful because that is what sticks in our brain. And that's been studied in motor learning, like that's so much more powerful. It won't be forgotten. Instead of like, am I supposed to do this next and then that and that's it. It's just not the way our society seems to be set up. Tell me how. I want to get the answer now.
We'll see what happens. Our medical system with a third party payer, who decides whether or not you qualify for the care that you would like to undergo. And these things they make the practice of medicine very difficult.
But there are like provisions in some policies, like where you can get a tax write-off, or some you put an account for certain spending that could include things like a gym membership, things that are good for your wellness.
Right.
And there's no doubt that what we're doing is good for wellness. It's just going to take time. And I have to say that when I first started getting the journal, I got certified in 2017, and I started getting the journal, and I was like, oh, I was just eye rolling at the research. It was so bad. Most of it was just because I did research, and I learned how to conduct research and what things are, how you need to write, and how to put it together so it's valid, and reliable tools, and size of subject study, and this and that. And it just was just such bad research. It's like this, and it's getting better. And in PT profession, when I started in 97, there wasn't a lot of research for supporting a lot of what PTs did. And
right.
It's tricky because you have to get enough people with the same problem with no other confounding things, and then you have to do one pointed intervention, or you have to design it in a way that it means something when your results come through, that they have meaning, either that nothing came, that you didn't learn, that's not valid, it doesn't work, or that this is an intervention that works. It takes a lot of time to compile all that research, if you're going to go down that route to verify. But that's all again in the Western model. But that's what everything is evidence based. you know.
The physical facts are all the facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have to say, Debbie, it's really been a great pleasure to interact with you over all these years. Not
Yeah.
just today, but over all these years. It's been wonderful, and it's been really meaningful to be a part of your life and transformation and development, and to hear all these stories about all the ways that yoga has been really meaningfully been improving people's lives, and how you have implemented it into your professional as well as your personal life is really it's really been awesome to be a part of it. So
Well, thank you. I've longed to have this kind of conversation with you. I didn't know I had to do a podcast to get there, though.
well, we'll do another one. We'll do another
Okay.
one. Thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
If people are interested in the sort of classes or that you give, et cetera, where do they find that information?
They can email me at deb.pineleaf@gmail.com, or they could look on my website and there's a contact me there. My website's Pine Leaf Therapeutic Yoga.
pineleaftherapeuticyoga.com.
Mm-hmm.
And your email is deb.pineleaf@gmail.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Chase.
I strongly recommend that people do that. Really, you have such awesome talent and information and hands-on training, and you have a lot to share with people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you've done. You totally changed my life. Thank you.
We'll see you again soon. All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.